Comfort of the Spirit of Truth, who are present and fillest all things, treasure of blessings and giver of life, come and abide in us and cleanse us from every impurity. Save our souls, O good Lord. I don't know if anybody else is reading it.
Well, I was reading a quote that Morris Pasternak, he stayed in the Soviet Union, and they wanted him to sign something, and so Stalin called him about it. He wouldn't sign the saying someone should be given the death penalty. And so eventually he wasn't purged. Supposedly Stalin crossed his name off the list of people to be purged. He said, let's not pay attention to that cloud below. And then he referred to him as a holy fool. So that's interesting that he used the Christian terminology to refer to it.
He was a former seminarian. Catherine.
So for those who that's all right. So for those who are interested, there's a seminar that's going to happen at Catholic University on monasticism on the 21st, 22nd. That's next Friday and Saturday. So that should be very interesting. There, a bunch of OCA people there, some Greeks, and some scholars. So it'll be interesting.
All day?
What's that?
All day?
In the afternoon on Friday, 12 to 6, and then all day on Saturday.
21st and 22nd?
Mm-hmm. So,
21st, 22nd.
Is it Orthodox monasticism or just?
Yeah, it's Orthodox. It's on Eastern monasticism, and it's almost all Orthodox scholars. I mean, it's. I know they have one major Syriac scholar there, who's done a lot of work on like Isaac and Ephraim in Syria. And so.
Who's reading?
I'm assuming I am, because
yeah,
I always do.
So we'll do this chapter tonight, and then we'll probably do at least 3 or 4 at a time until we get to the long ones at the end. So
we left off on 49, right?
Yeah,
number 49.
Step 15, chapter 49.
Okay. Let us examine, measure, and observe during psalmody what kind of sweetness comes to us from the demon of fornication, and on the other hand, what kind of sweetness comes to us from the words of the Spirit and from the grace and power contained in them. Do not be ignorant of yourself, young man. I have seen men who in reality were moved by the spirit of fornication, pray with all their soul for their loved ones while believing they were fulfilling the law of love. Touch alone is sufficient for bodily defilement, for nothing is so dangerous as this sense. Remember him who trapped his hand in his cassock when about to carry his sick mother, and deadened your hand to natural or unnatural things, whether your own or another's body. I think that one ought not to call anyone a saint in any real sense until he has transformed this earth into holiness, if such transformation is even possible. When we are lying in bed, let us be especially sober and vigilant, because then our mind struggles with the demons without our body, and if it is sensual, it readily becomes a traitor. Always let the remembrance of death and the prayer of Jesus, being of a single phrase, go to sleep with you and get up with you, for you will find nothing to equal these aids during sleep. Some think that battles and emissions during sleep come only from food, but I have observed that people who are seriously ill and the strictest fasters are very prone to these pollutions. I once asked one one of the most experienced and distinguished monks about this, and the blessed man explained it to me very clearly. Emissions during sleep, said that ever memorable man, come from abundance of food and from a life of ease. They also come from conceit, when we pride ourselves that we have not been subjected to these effluxes for a long time. And also they come from judging our neighbor. The last cases, he added, can happen even to the sick, but perhaps all three can. But if anyone is unable to find any of these reasons in himself, then he is indeed blessed to be so free from passion. And if this happens to him, then it comes solely from the envy of the demons, and God allows it for a time in order that, after a sinless mishap, he may obtain the most sublime humility. Let no one get into the habit of thinking over during the daytime the fantasies that have occurred to him during sleep. For the aim of the demons in prompting this is to defile us while we are awake by making us think about our dreams. Let us listen again to another wile of our foes. Just as food which is bad for the body produces sickness after a time or some days, so this often happens in the case of actions which defile the soul. I have seen some give way to luxury and not at once feel the attacks of the enemy. I have seen others eat with women and converse with them, and at the time had no bad thoughts whatsoever in their mind. They were thus deceived and encouraged to grow careless and to think that they were in peace and safety, and then suffered sudden destruction in their cells. But what bodily and spiritual destruction comes to us when we are alone? He who is tempted knows, and he who is not tempted does not need to know. On these occasions, the best aids for us are sackcloth, ashes, all-night standing, hunger, moistening the tongue in moderation when parched with thirst, dwelling amongst the tombs, and above all, humility of heart, and if possible, a spiritual father or zealous brother, one spiritually mature to help us. For I shall be surprised if anyone will be able by himself to save his ship from the sea. One and the same fall often incurs a condemnation 100 times greater for one person than for another, according to character, place, progress, and a good deal else. Someone told me of an extraordinarily high degree of purity. He said a certain man, on seeing a beautiful woman, thereupon glorified the Creator, and from that one look he was moved to the love of God and to a fountain of tears. It was wonderful to see how what would have been a cause of destruction for one was for another the supernatural cause of a crown. If such a person always feels and behaves in the same way on similar occasions, then he has risen immortal before the general resurrection. Let us be guided by the same rule in singing melodies and songs. For lovers of God are moved to gladness, but to divine love, and to tears both by worldly and spiritual songs, but lovers of pleasure to the opposite. As we have said before, some people in hermitages suffer far more severe attacks from the enemy, and no wonder, for the demons haunt such places, since the Lord in his care for our salvation has driven them into the deserts and the abyss. Demons of fornication cruelly assault the hesychast in order to drive him back into the world, as having received no benefit from the desert. Demons keep away from us when we are living in the world, that we may go on staying among worldly-minded people because we are not attacked there. Hence, we should realize that the place in which we are attacked is the one in which we are certainly waging bitter war on the enemy. For if we ourselves are not waging war, the enemy is found to be our friend. When we are in the world for some necessity, we are protected by the hand of God, perhaps through the prayer of our spiritual Father, that the Lord may not be blasphemed through us. And sometimes we are protected through our insensitivity, and through having had long experience of the sights of the world and its subjects of conversation and all its doings. And sometimes it is because the demons go away of their own accord, and leave us only the demon of conceit, which takes the place of all the rest. Hear yet another trick and villainy of that deceiver, all you who desire to practice and guard purity. One who had experience of this craftiness told me that the demon of sensuality very often hid himself completely, and while a monk was sitting or conversing with women, he would suggest to him extreme piety, and perhaps even a fountain of tears, and would put into his mind the thought of instructing them on the remembrance of death, judgment, and chastity. Then the poor women, being deceived by his speech and false piety, would run to this wolf as to a shepherd, and when at last acquaintance ripened into familiarity, the unfortunate monk would suffer a fall. Let us, by every means in our power, avoid either seeing or hearing of that fruit which we have vowed not to taste. For it is absurd to think ourselves stronger than the prophet David. That is impossible. Purity is worthy of such great and high praise that certain of the fathers ventured to call it freedom from passion. Some say that those who have tasted sin cannot be called pure. In refutation of this view, I would say, if anyone is willing, it is possible and easy to graft a good olive onto a wild olive. And if the keys of heaven had been entrusted to one who had always lived in a state of virginity, then perhaps the teaching of those who maintain what I have quoted above would be right. But let them be put to shame by him who had a mother-in-law, and having become pure, received the keys of the kingdom. The snake of sensuality is many-faced, and those who are inexperienced in sin, he sows the thought of making one trial and then stopping. But this crafty creature incites those who have tried this to fresh trial through the remembrance of their sin. Many inexperienced people feel no conflict in themselves simply because they do not know what is bad, and the experienced, because they know this abomination, suffer disquiet and struggle. But often the opposite of this also happens. When we rise from sleep in a good and peaceful mood, we are being secretly encouraged by the holy angels, especially if we went to sleep with much prayer and watching. But sometimes we rise from sleep in a bad mood, and this is a result of evil dreams and visions. I have seen the wicked one highly exalted and towering aloft and foaming and raging in me like the cedars of Lebanon. And I passed by with temperance, and lo, his fury was not as before. Then I humbled my thought and looked for him, but not even his place or a trace of him could be found in me. He who has conquered his body has conquered nature, and he who has conquered nature has certainly risen above nature. And he who has done this is little, if at all, lower than the angels.
Okay. Any questions so far? Points?
He was saying that the people are more likely to be attacked in a monastery than...
Yeah, the devil doesn't have to work as hard in the world. Whereas in the monastery, people are really struggling against him. And for the most part in the world, people are not. And we tempt ourselves so that he doesn't have, he has no need to tempt us.
But if someone's in the world and struggling, then they'll get attacked.
Mm-hmm.
But with the devil, he particularly focuses on monasteries.
Well, yeah, of course. And the hermits are the ones who are going to be attacked the most. Well, in the Cenobitic monastery, you have all the brothers to cause all sorts of trials and temptations. In the hermitage, you don't. So,
what's the difference?
the hermitage,
A hermitage in the monastery.
a hermit lives alone.
Okay.
And a monastery is usually a community.
How is she tempted then?
Well, you can be tempted in all sorts of different ways.
If you live alone.
What's that?
If you're alone all the time.
Well, yeah, but you can.
I mean, actually, yeah. Okay.
You can be tempted to despondency. You can be tempted to anger. You can be tempted to jealousy. You can be tempted to, all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And then there's solitary passions, which are one can be tempted by as well.
I can only think of alcoholism and that. Especially nobody there to judge you,
Right, exactly.
Luckily, a hermit doesn't often have the internet.
Yeah. Well, actually,
True.
internet is really a problem.
It is.
And I was just down at the Big Greek Monastery in Candelia, Texas, and it's the facility is huge. There's only 10 men in the brotherhood, and it's a great brotherhood. They really love one another, and they built this new facility, but they're so happy in their little skeet they don't want to move into it. But I was asking them what their discipline is, and the monks are not permitted to access the internet, period, or and they have business to do for the monastery, but that's it. And of course, there's no TV, there's nothing. So, you want to communicate, you write letters.
So then, is there an advantage to the monastic life, or is it more difficult?
Well, it's the arena.
But then what? So you're more likely to find the path to holiness outside of the monastery? No. The battle is stronger, and so the rewards are greater, in a sense. I mean, it wasn't to people in the world that Jesus said, if you wish to be perfect, go all and sell that you have and give to the poor. And that's specifically a kind of monastic call. So, yeah. Anything else? Okay. 72.
It is not surprising for the immaterial to struggle with the immaterial, but it is truly surprising for one inhabiting matter and in conflict with this hostile and crafty matter to put to flight immaterial foes. The good Lord shows his great care for us, and that the shamelessness of the feminine sex is checked by shyness as with a sort of bit. For if the woman were to run after the man, no flesh would be saved.
Well, that's true. And that's what we've got now.
The discerning fathers have defined that assault is one thing, converse another, consent another, captivity another, struggle another, passion so called in the soul another. And these blessed men define assault as a simple conception, or an image of something encountered for the first time, which has entered the heart. Converse or conversation with what has presented itself, accompanied with passion or dispassion. And consent is the bending of the soul to what has been presented to it, accompanied by delight. But captivity is forcible and involuntary rape of the heart, and a permanent association with what has been encountered, which destroys the good order of our condition. Struggle, according to their definition, is power equal to the attacking force, which is either victorious or else suffers defeat according to the soul's desire. Passion, they say, is preeminently that which for a long time nestles with persistence in the soul, forming therein a habit, as it were, by the soul's long-standing association with it, since the soul of its own free and proper choice clings to it. Of all these states, the first is without sin, the second not always, the third is sinful or sinless according to the state of the contestant. Struggle is the occasion of crowns or punishments. Captivity is judged differently, according to whether it occurs at the time of prayer or at other times, whether in things indifferent, neither good or bad, or in the case of evil thoughts. But passion is unequivocally condemned in every case, and demands either corresponding repentance or future punishment. Therefore, he who regards the first assault dispassionately cuts off at a single blow all the rest which follow.
Okay. So what he's talking about is the process of how a thought captivates the mind, or how a thought moves from a suggestion or a provocation through the whole process of the mind to action, to habit, and to passion. So this is actually a really helpful paragraph in talking about that, and I think it kind of makes it clear what parts of that process actually lead to sin and what parts of the process are without sin.
What does he mean by captivity?
Captivity is when you can't get the thought out of your head. It just you keep turning it over and over and over. You're really enticed by it, and you want to do it, and you're not sure, and so you just think about it.
Okay.
So did he say that was sin or not sin?
Well, what does he say? Captivity is judged differently according to whether it occurs at the time of prayer or at other times, whether in things indifferent, neither good nor bad, or in the case of evil thoughts. So, if you have a song that keeps running through your head, depending on the song, that can be completely sinless, or it can be completely sinful. But if you have a sexual image come into your mind at prayer, and you just, and you try and bat it away, but you keep going back to it, and then you indulge it, it's already a sinful thought. And especially
Even
because
if it's involuntary?
Well, by that time, it's not involuntary. You see, the point is, when it comes, it's involuntary. But you make it, you voluntarily accept to think about it. And then you start thinking about it, and it keys off your passions. In other words, it keys off a reaction. And by that time, it dominates your mind, right? And then what's left is then you're really struggling whether to fall into it or not. And then finally you make a decision: I'm going to do it or I'm not going to do it, whatever it is. And so this is really important in the whole process of watching our mind, in order to be able to cut off the provocative thoughts at the root, and not allow them to get into a point where they're going to start putting out their tendrils into our habitual reactions. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So once they become habitual reactions, like on the street, see somebody walking, it's a female, oh, you noticed there, what does it look like? And then it's like, is it like you have to, all of a sudden you feel like that habitual, like, or that knee-jerk reaction, you have to stop it and question it? Like, does it mean like there has to be a constant, like, vigilant over our habitual actions?
Yeah, but I mean, you don't have to kind of take yourself in hand and say, no, I'm not going to do that. unless it's pretty far down the road. But you can say, I recognize there's a thought there, and just let it go.
Mm-hmm.
That's cutting it off like at the second stage. Once you've entered into converse with it, in other words, once you've begun to look at it and see, well, do I really want to deal with this, or do I want it? And and if it's something where we're habitually attracted to it, you ask yourself, do I really want to deal with it? And part of you says, yes, and go. But then the idea is to be conscious enough, and to make that whole, and to have that whole process conscious enough that you can just cut off the thought.
Earlier on, I should have asked this earlier, but when he was talking about dreams and emissions, etc., was he implying, and he gave various causes like food and whatnot, was he implying that the emission was sinful no matter what the cause was, or it was only sinful if it was accompanied by fantasies, as he talked about it earlier?
Well, if it's the result of thoughts and fantasies, yeah. If it's as he says, from the envy of the demons, no, it's not sinful. Or if it's from judging your neighbor, that doesn't. The omission may not be so sinful, but judging your neighbor is definitely sinful. Or overeating may be the sin, and the body just has a reaction.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay.
Amongst the more precise and discerning fathers, there is mention of a still more subtle notion, something which some of them call a flick of the mind. This is its characteristic. Without passage of time, without word or image, it instantaneously introduces the passion to the victim. There is nothing swifter or more indiscernible among spirits. It manifests itself in the soul by a simple remembrance, which is instantaneous, independent, inapprehensible, and in some cases even unknown to the person himself. If anyone, therefore, with the help of mourning, has been able to detect such a subtlety, he can explain to us how it is possible for a soul, by the eye alone, by a mere glance, or the touch of the hand, or the hearing of a song, without any notion or thought, to commit a definite sin of impurity. Some say that it is from thoughts of fornication that passions invade the body, but some affirm, on the contrary, that it is from the bodily senses that evil thoughts are born. The former say that if the mind had not gone before, the body would not have followed after, and the latter adduce the villainy of bodily passion in justification of their view, saying that often bad thoughts manage to enter our heart as the result of a pleasant sight, or the touch of a hand, or the smell of perfume, or hearing sweet voices. If anyone can do so in the Lord, let him explain this. For knowledge of this sort is extremely necessary and profitable for those living the active life discerningly. But for those practicing virtue and simplicity of heart, this is not of the least importance. For not all have knowledge, but neither do all have the blessed simplicity which is the breastplate against the wiles of evil spirits. Some passions pass to the body from the soul, and some do the opposite. The latter happens to people living in the world, but the former to those living the monastic life, because of the lack of outward stimulus. But about this I will only say, thou shalt seek wisdom among evil men, and shalt not find it. When we have struggled much with this demon, the mate of clay, and driven it out of our heart, torturing it with the stone of fasting and the sword of humility, then this wretch, like some kind of worm, hides itself in our body and endeavors to defile us, tickling us into irrational and untimely movements. It is those who are subject to the demon of arrogance who especially suffer in this way, because as their hearts are no longer continually occupied with impure thoughts, they are prone to the passion of pride. And in order to be convinced of the truth of what has been said, when they have achieved a certain measure of stillness, let them discreetly examine themselves. Then they will certainly find that some thought is concealed in the depth of their heart like a snake in dung, suggesting to them that they have made some progress in purity of heart by their own effort and zeal. Poor wretches, they do not think of what was said. What hast thou that thou didst not receive as a free gift, either from God or by the cooperation and prayers of others? And so let them look to their own affairs, and let them be cast out of their heart with all speed. And let them cast out their heart with all speed the snake mentioned above, killing it by much humility, so that when they have got rid of it, they may in time be stripped of their clothing of skin. And as chaste children sing to the Lord the triumphal hymn of purity, if only when they are stripped, they do not find themselves naked of that humility and freedom from malice which is natural to children. This demon, much more than any other, watches for critical movements, and when we are unable to pray bodily against it, then the unholy creature launches a special attack against us. For those who have not yet obtained true prayer of heart, violence in bodily prayer is a great help. I mean stretching out the hands, beating the breast, sincere raising of the eyes to heaven, deep sighing, frequent prostrations. But often they cannot do this owing to the presence of other people, and so the demons especially choose to attack them just at this very time. And as we have not yet the strength to resist them by firmness of mind and the invisible power of prayer, we yield to our enemies. If possible, go apart for a brief space. Hide for a while in some secret place. Raise on high the eyes of your soul if you can, but if not your bodily eyes. Hold your arms motionless in the form of a cross in order to shame and conquer your Amalek by this sign. Cry to him who is mighty to save, not with cleverly spun phrases, but in humble words, preferably making this your prelude. Have mercy on me, for I am weak. Then you will know by experience the power of the Most High, and with invisible help you will invisibly drive away the invisible ones. He who accustoms himself to wage war in this way will soon be able to put his enemies to flight solely by spiritual means, for the latter is a recompense from God to doers of the former, and rightly so. In a gathering where I was, I noticed that an earnest brother was troubled by evil thoughts, and he could not find a suitable place for secret prayer. He went out as if compelled by natural necessity to the place set apart for that purpose, and there armed himself with vigorous prayer against the enemy. When I reproached him for choosing an indecent place, he replied, "In an unclean place I prayed to drive away unclean thoughts in order to be cleansed of all impurity." All demons try to darken our mind, and then they suggest what they like. For as long as the mind does not shut its eyes, we shall not be robbed of our treasure. But the demon of fornication tries to do this much more than all the rest. Often, after darkening our mind which governs us, it urges and disposes us in the presence of people to do what only those who are out of their mind do. Then later, when the mind becomes sober, we are ashamed of our unholy acts, words, and gestures, not only before those who saw us, but also before ourselves, and we are amazed at our previous blindness. Often as a result of such reflection, men have desisted from this evil. Banish the enemy when he hinders you from prayer, worship, or vigil after you have committed sin. Remember him who said, "Yet because the soul, tyrannized by predispositions, gives me trouble, I will avenge her upon her enemies." Who has conquered his body? He who has crushed his heart. And who has crushed his heart? He who has denied himself. For how can he not be crushed who has died to his own will? There is a passionate person more passionate than the passionate, and he will even confess his pollutions with pleasure and enjoyment. Unclean and shameful thoughts in the heart are generally produced by the deceiver of the heart, the demon of fornication. But temperance and disregard of them is the cure. But I do not know by what habit and rule of life I can bind this friend of mine, and judge him by the example of the other passions. For behold, before I can bind him, he is let loose. Before I can condemn him, I am reconciled to him. Before I can punish him, I bend down and pity him. How can I hate him by whom by nature I habitually love? How can I get free of him with whom I am bound forever? How can I escape what will share my resurrection? How am I to make immortal what has received a mortal nature? What argument can I use to one who has the argument of nature on his side? If I bind him by fasting, by condemning my neighbor, I am handed over to him again. If desisting from judgment I overmaster him, then being proud of this, I am subjected to him again. For he is an ally and a foe, an assistant and a rival, a defender and a traitor. If I humor him, he attacks me. If I exhaust him, he gets feeble. When he is rested, he becomes unruly. If I turn away in loathing, he cannot bear it. If I mortify him, I endanger myself. If I strike him down, I have nothing with which to obtain virtues. I both embrace him and turn away from him. What is this mystery in me? What is the meaning of this blending of body and soul? How am I constituted a friend and a foe to myself? Tell me, my yoke-fellow, my nature, for I shall not ask anyone else in order to learn about you. How am I to remain unwounded by you? How can I avoid the danger of my nature? For I have already made a vow to Christ to wage war against you. How am I to overcome your tyranny? For I am resolved to be your master. And the flesh might say in reply to its soul, I shall never tell you anything which you do not know equally well, but only of things of which we both have knowledge. I have my Father within me, self-love. The fire which I experience from within comes from humoring me and from general comfort. The fire which burns within in the movements of thoughts come from past ease and bygone deeds. Having conceived, I give birth to sins, and they, when born, in turn beget death by despair. And if you clearly know the profound weakness which is in both you and me, you have bound my hands. If you starve your appetite, you have bound my feet from going further. If you take the yoke of obedience, you have thrown off my yoke. If you obtain humility, you have cut off my head. This is the 15th reward of victory. He who has received it, while still living in the flesh, has died and risen, and from now on experiences the foretaste of future immortality.
Okay. So, yeah.
There's mentions like those who haven't achieved a true prayer of the heart. What does he mean by true prayer of the heart?
Well, true prayer of the heart means that is noetic prayer, which is the consciousness of God, and it's the unbroken awareness, consciousness of God. Is prayer of the heart. And it takes a long time to get there. And so it goes through from the lips to the mind, then eventually descends into the heart. Then it goes deep.
Yeah, we all have that to an extent, just maybe not 24/7.
Well, it's in a sense we all do have it. It's that because that's the natural, that's the state in which we were created. but it's gotten so corrupted by our sinfulness and by our passions that we live oblivious to it for the most part. It takes this whole process of purification, of illumination, is that process to be able to enter into the conscious prayer of the heart.
Once you have it, you can ignore everything you said there. So that won't be a problem, right?
Well, it's not quite that easy, but that's the idea.
The process of illumination, isn't that done during baptism? Because there's a prayer that says, "You are illumined, you are washed."
It's the foretaste of it.
Okay.
It's the pledge of it. But like everything else, it's a dynamic potential that's put within us to see whether we're going to actualize it or not.
Okay.
And if we don't, that's pretty sad.
Yeah.
But Deacon, when you said you started by saying from the lips to the heart, so
To the mind.
Lips to the mind, right? So is that the basis of our Orthodox emphasis on saying the morning prayers in a sort of
Well, the perfect
formalistic way to begin?
Well, if you want to talk about that, the things like the morning prayers, the prayer book prayers, the devotions and things like that, those are there as a discipline to teach us how to pray, to establish a very beginning level of foundation that you can build upon. But that's not. That will only take you so far, and so you can go from. You can use those prayers as a springing off point for contemplative prayer, for prayer of the heart. But ultimately, the tradition has us use the Jesus prayer, and then the Jesus prayer becomes mental. First is oral, and then is mental prayer, and then it descends into the heart, and it becomes more of a kind of an intention rather than words. It's not like you're sitting there for the next 50 years going, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, sinner. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, sinner." It's rather, it's through that process of interiorization and of going through the process of uniting the body and the mind with the heart, with the nous. In other words, spiritualizing the body and the mind, the rational mind. And then once then prayer takes on another entire dimension, and it's in silence. It's silence of the lips, silence of the mind, and silence of the heart. And then it becomes, and the main actor, the main active party is God. Mm-hmm. So it becomes the Holy Spirit praying within you.
How do you know it's there?
Oh, you know.
I mean, if it's there, it can go away, right?
Yeah, it can. Or you can lose. You can become forgetful, which means that you lose the consciousness of it. But you attain to it. You attain the awareness of the presence of God. And you attain that spiritual awareness, and then usually it stays. Now, there are also times when God withdraws. And it's not that God has abandoned us, it feels like it, but rather God withdraws to let us see if we're serious.
Yeah, like in Philadelphia, I think when we were reading it, forget when, he says, like, just empty your mind and just let God fill the rest of you or something like that. He didn't really elaborate on that.
No, because there's not much more that you can say. You know, that's...
See, they're saying what to do, they're not saying how to do it. You see what I'm saying?
Well, that's saying that's both. You empty your mind and you stay in silence and let God do the rest. But it's a lot of work to stay in silence, which means no thoughts, no images, no concepts, no ideas, no feelings, no emotions, no nothing.
You're dead.
No. You're profoundly aware. That's the state of contemplation. Theoria. Theoria in Greek.
Father Victor gave a very good homily
of that.
on Sunday, and I think he was quoting, was it maybe St. Isaac the Syrian or one of the fathers, and he said that he woke up, as it were, and he was aware that it was Christ in his body, like when he moved his hand.
Completely empty.
Right.
And Christ filled.
Christ filled him, and so when he moved his hand, it was Christ's hand that was moving, and when he moved his foot, it was Christ's foot that was moving. It was very beautiful.
To the words of St. Paul, who said, "It is not I, but Christ in me."
Yeah. So that's related, right, to what?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I was just thinking of that.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and so basically the whole process comes to this radical transformation of oneself in Christ by the Holy Spirit, so that your life is hidden with Christ and God, and you become transparent to Christ. And that's who the great elders are. They're those who have achieved that level of sanctity. But it's a long road.
Not a microwave dinner.
No. No. It means you have to go catch the fish, which means you have to go miles and miles to the coast to find a place where you can catch a fish, and then you have to catch the fish and clean it and prepare it.
Be like the fishermen.
Yeah. You don't even know where the fish is.
Yeah. It's not
whether you catch it.
It's not like going to Safeway.
There was once I went fishing with my dad, and we were having problems fishing, trying to catch anything. And I told myself, Lord, show me where to throw my line, and I shall catch. 10 minutes later, I caught by a 6-footer.
A 6-footer?
Yeah.
Wow.
I caught a 6-footer catfish out of the stomach. So it took us like 2 hours to catch it, and I was like, you know what, God, show me where it is, and I shall catch it. And he just showed me the path right there.
I've found recently that curiosity often leads me into sin. Just if I see someone, one of my coworkers, looking at their phone or something, almost like half the time there's a naked woman on it or something.
Oh God.
And I'm wondering if you have anything to say about that sort of thing, if that's like a phenomenon, like I mean, in
Don't
our
look.
Well, yes, but it seems
not a naked man.
It's
right?
well, yeah. I feel like I'd be less tempted by that.
It's called temptation.
But it's everywhere. It's advertisements. You can't escape. It's traumatizing. It's everywhere. It's like something trying to steal your attention. And
just don't look.
But how? If it's everywhere that you look, it's at some point like you can't even drive down the road anymore without seeing something that entices your passions.
Right.
How am I supposed to live?
It's
so
designed
like
to
five women like running.
You know, I usually do. I just start praying sometimes to get my mind off of it.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's the way. You know, you try to keep your eyes averted, and the only other way is to go off into a desert monastery that's strict and doesn't have, because in a normal monastic setting, a normal strict monastic, there'd be no TV, there'd be no internet, there'd be no computers, there'd be no, no newspapers, no magazines, no nothing. No pictures, no images. And there may be pictures, but they're not going to be.
About books.
The books would also be there'd be certain books that would not be allowed for general consumption. Not just the swimsuit edition, but So, and if you want to be very strict with yourself about that, you simply guard your eyes. Mm-hmm. Is the whole point. And by guarding your eyes, you guard your mind. And when your mind sees on an image, then you try and replace it with the presence of God. Let God banish the image. Knowing from a point of humility that you don't have the strength to. Because if you think you have the strength to, you're lost.
Yeah. It looks like the vision is a source of sin, so you have to be blind. You don't see whatever.
Well, it can be, yeah. As the Lord said, if your eye offends you, pluck it out.
What?
Well, I'm quoting.
Very like what said about
pluck it out, maybe just get control of yourself a little bit.
I like what it said about King David. It's really good.
What?
If we presume ourselves to be stronger than King David, we are fools. It's not exactly the way he put it, but I really like that a lot.
Do your homework, buddy.
I don't.
No, you got to.
I heard the saying. It's not the first time to say it.
Let's hear it.
But there's again, even in Russia, in the 14th century, they stopped the punishment of dismembering people.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of have the church to teach them how to work out their sins and repent.
Mm-hmm. But the point is to stop sinning.
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
What is it? St. John of Shanghai said, sin is forgiven if not repeated.
Mm-hmm.
If never repeated. Something like that.
Yeah.
So I can sin intentionally once, and then it's fine. I'm sorry, that's not a good joke.
That's kind of
that's not a good joke. I'm sorry.
I don't know what category would that go into.
Intentional sin.
Yeah.
That's no. That would we actually last Saturday when we did a liturgy at your place. That monk was reading a thing about devil. Tempting Christ, he said, go up on the mountain and jump off. And, God loves you so much, he'll send angels to catch you. And Christ answered, it is not wise to tempt God.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be, I guess, tempting God there. Who knows, maybe you'd sin and not have time to repent.
Sure. So what else?
I found that praying more helps, and that is trying confessing, and then, but not getting discouraged, because that's even worse.
Yep.
What I found that over time, problem can diminish. It can be so gradual. But if I keep striving, that it may decrease so little. It's like it's a little bit less, but it's not making progress. But over time, it can eventually. But that I found a prayer. Actually, it's a key that is one of the saints have it. With respect to chastity and purity, what we're talking about, you have to admit, the prayer says, it's impossible without God.
Right.
To turn to, you have to admit it's impossible. Once I saw that, I'm like, oh, I have to admit complete defeat, and then I can't do it.
That's right.
Only, and I found after that, because using the will against certain things doesn't work.
Right, exactly.
At all. So, but that prayer, I don't remember which thing.
Yeah, you essentially abandon yourself to God and let Him deal with it.
If you lose your will, I don't understand that. If you lose your will in that regard, that
the willpower doesn't work.
Yeah, especially if you have a long-established habit, willpower doesn't work.
Like with alcoholism, too, the main, I know something about that. It's a person is able to make progress and get away from it when they admit complete defeat, that the will doesn't work at all, and it doesn't. So complete defeat is the main source of strength. So when I saw that prayer, I'm like, oh, this is applicable to other things. In fact, the willpower is a detriment with many forms of addiction.
Heart that is broken, humble, God will not despise.
Oh, that's one. Well, it's a different one.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah.
So, is there just one demon of fornication? Because it seems like there's a million.
I think there's lots.
Yes, because it's always referred to in Scripture and holy books as the demon, but there's got to be more than one, I would assume.
Maybe each one of us have a unique one assigned to
us. And there's like a hierarchy, right?
That joke again.
And how does
you start making bad jokes?
I mean, I assume there's only a fixed amount of demons, and there's 7 billion people in the world. Like, how does can one demon tempt more than one person at a time?
I'm not the one to ask.
Angels are omnipresent.
Probably got a few at a time. Tempting you.
No one else.
Oh, I don't know. Anyone.
Are angels omnipresent?
Yeah.
Only God is, right?
Only God is omnipresent.
That's one.
Yeah.
But then the saints partake of God's omnipresence. But they're not omnipresent by nature, but by participation. Same thing with the angels, by participation.
What did you mean by that specifically when you said that the saints are omnipresent? Does that mean that they can be aware of things that are happening in other places from where they are? Is it like clairvoyance?
Where are they?
They're in God.
They're in God, so yeah. But that's by grace, not by nature. You want to try? So read a couple more chapters.
Okay.
16 and 17 are really short.
This is very short. Yeah, I can do that. Step 16, on love of money or avarice. After the tyrant just described, many learned teachers next treat the thousand-headed demon of avarice. We, unlearned as we are, did not wish to change the order of the learned, and we have therefore followed the same convention and rule. So let us say a little about the disease, and then speak briefly about the remedy. Avarice, or love of money, is the worship of idols, a daughter of unbelief, an excuse for infirmities, a foreboder of old age, a harbinger of drought, a herald of famines. The lover of money sneers at the gospel, and is a willful transgressor. He who has attained to love scatters his money. But he who says that he lives for love and for money has deceived himself. He who mourns for himself has renounced his body, and at the appropriate time he does not spare it. Do not say that you are collecting money for the poor. With 2 mites the kingdom was purchased. A hospitable man and a money lover met one another, and the latter called the former undiscerning. He who has conquered this passion has cut out care, but he who is bound by it never attains to true prayer. The beginning of love of money is the pretext of almsgiving, and the end of it is the hatred of the poor. So long as he is collecting, he is charitable, but when the money is in hand, he tightens his grip. I have seen how men of scant means enriched themselves by living with the poor of spirit and forgot their first poverty. A monk who loves money is a stranger to a city, and hourly he remembers the word of the apostle, "Let an idle man not eat, and these hands of mine have ministered to me and to them that were with me." This is the 16th struggle. He who has won this victory has either obtained love or cut out care.
Any questions?
Yeah, no.
What's the last number 10 mean? Like a monk who loves money
Peter.
is a stranger to idleness.
Don't they all give it up when
Peter.
they take the monastic
Peter.
vow? Monks.
Well, yeah, supposedly. But just because somebody's taken the vow doesn't mean that they've conquered their passions.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it takes time, it takes years to bring themselves under control. So
It's not perhaps the money that is they go after. There's the sin. So you should always in the evening prayers. In Russian it's called mshleimstvo, like hoarding, like a love for possessions.
Right. Possessiveness.
Possessions, yeah. That's what it leads to usually.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because like I don't know, like being rich, I don't think that's sin. Sin is what it might lead you into.
Right. Well, just having possessions is not a sin. It's what you do with them.
Mm-hmm.
It either leads to virtue or it leads to sin.
When I was a child, when they in the first grade and the nuns were explaining the meaning of the 10 Commandments, they were teaching us, so it's a long time ago, that modern forms of idolatry could be money, avarice.
Sure, absolutely.
That, and someone, therefore, doesn't think they need God, and they don't have to go to church. And that's how they were kind of explaining it to us in the first grade.
Yeah.
So they didn't say like the girls, some first grade, like they would want to put lipstick or, so they didn't so much attack them for that act, but more to say that, why do you need to do that? Why don't you take that money and donate it to someone who needs it? Things like that.
Okay, 17.
So one last thing about what does it mean to cut out care?
Yeah, yes.
Well, In other words, he no longer, somebody who has cut off this passion of the love of money no longer worries about material things. So he's cut out care.
Is it possible in a modern, like living in the world?
No, not living in the world. In the monastery under obedience, it should be.
I mean, not in the world. I mean, we all, work and God provides what we need, no more, no less, usually.
Well, in the monastery, you're still working, of course, for the, but it's you never see the money that comes from your, you may be making something, but you're not the one who's selling it, and you're not the one who's collecting the money for it. So, you live, if in a large monastery, you are completely free of worrying about where's the money going to come from to pay for whatever. Which actually has good points, you're free, but it also has bad points because it can make you very childish and keep you immature, as if you don't have responsibility, and just take everything as granted and live an entitled life. And that's not the idea at all, but rather the person who becomes mature in monastic life has a sense of responsibility for the whole community, no matter whether he's the abbot or whether he's the candle maker or whether he's the one who sweeps the walk. There's that sense of responsibility for the whole thing.
I mean, in the world, you have financial responsibility for yourself, maybe for the family eventually, for the IRS.
Right.
Right. It does actually keep you kind of focused and disciplined in many respects.
Right. And that's the idea. And you can even see that as a spiritual discipline. So, we do 17?
Step 17 on non-possessiveness that hastens one heavenwards. Non-possessiveness is the resignation of cares, life without anxiety, an unencumbered wayfarer, alienation from sorrow, fidelity to the commandments. A non-possessive monk is lord of the world. He has entrusted his cares to God, and by faith has obtained all men as his servants. He will not tell his need to man, and he receives what comes to him as from the hand of the Lord. The non-possessive ascetic is a son of detachment, and thinks of what he has as if it were nothing. When he becomes a solitary, he regards everything as refuse. But if he worries about something, he has not yet become non-possessive. A non-possessive man is pure during prayer, but an acquisitive man prays to material images. Those who live in obedience are strangers to love of money, for where even the body has given up, what is left to be one's own? Only in one way can they be harmed, namely by being ready and quick to go from place to place. I have seen material possessions make monks patient to remain in one place, but I praise those who are pilgrims for the Lord. He who has tasted the things on high easily despises what is below, but he who has not tasted the things above finds joy in possessions. A man who is senselessly non-possessive suffers a double harm. He abstains from present goods and is deprived of future ones. Let us monks, then, be as trustful as the birds are, for they have no cares, neither do they gather into barns. Great is he who piously renounces possessions, but holy is he who renounces his will. The one will receive 100-fold, either in money or in graces, but the other will inherit eternal life. Waves never leave the sea, nor do anger and grief leave the avaricious. He who despises what is material is rid of quarrels and controversies, but the covetous man will fight till death for a needle. Unwavering faith cuts off cares, and remembrance of death denies the body as well. In Job there was no trace of avarice. Therefore, when he lost everything, he remained undisturbed. The love of money is, and is called, the root of all evils, because it produces hatred, thefts, envy, separations, enmities, storms, remembrance of wrong, hard-heartedness, and murders. Some have burned much wood with a small fire, and with the help of one virtue, some have escaped all the passions just mentioned. The virtue is called detachment, and it is born of experience and a taste of God, and concern for the account to be given at death. The attentive reader will remember the history of the mother of all evil. When she enumerated her wicked and cursed children, she said that her second offspring was the stone of insensibility. But the many-headed snake of idolatry prevented me from giving it its own special place. I do not know why, but the discerning fathers give it the third place in the chain of the 8 deadly sins. Having said sufficient about avarice, we now intend to speak about insensibility as the third infirmity, though the second born. And after this we shall treat briefly of sleep and watchfulness, and also of puerile and cowardly fear, for these are the failings of beginners. This is the 17th step. He who has mounted it is journeying to heaven stripped of material things.
Okay. So, any questions?
Is that one possible in the world?
No.
In any way?
No, actually. No, I mean, unless you. No, I mean, if you renounce the world in the sense of renouncing possessions, maybe if you go to a monastery or you live as a hermit there just by yourself, and you can live as a fool for Christ on the streets and be non-possessive, I suppose. But always in the world, you're going to be troubled by the cares of possessions.
How does one go about becoming a fool for Christ?
You have to be very mature spiritually. Very, very spiritually mature. Because if it becomes if it's done out of vainglory, it's meaningless. And you just become a fool.
It could even be demonic.
Yeah,
and that's,
exactly.
That's the worrisome
It can be
thing.
demonic, yeah. And so it's very important that there's historically very, very, very few people who have been fools for Christ, because so very few people have attained to that kind of maturity where they can deal with it.
It's always been very attractive to me. I think mostly as an aesthetic choice.
Dream on, dude.
But if the person that does that, if they enjoy annoying people, then that's not. If it's done out of like a
well, it's just being a fool.
Then if it's done like extreme entertainment, they like it.
That's very unhealthy.
The idea is that you do it for others, not out of joy. You know, that being
not
a
out
fool
of
is
joy.
supposed to be a cross, not a pleasure of being a clown, I would imagine.
No. It's not necessarily being a clown.
Some of them were very brave. They confronted kings with their sins. And
yeah.
That's why I find them so they're just so out there. It's just...
Yeah, they're totally out there, all right.
I always go back to that Saint Simeon the Holy Fool eating the sausage stole in front of church.
St. Basil.
Oh, Saint Basil. Are you sure?
Yeah, that's the name of the church after him.
Saint Basil the Holy Fool. I thought that
Saint
was
Basil the Blessed.
Saint Simeon.
No, it was Basil. There was. I'm sure there was a fool for Christ, Simeon, and then there was, and then especially like Simeon, and the Stylites were kind of. It's almost a kind of fool for Christ ministry.
It was very weird.
Yeah, very weird.
He mentions in 5 the Pilgrim, and that was interesting. It was reminding me of the story of the Russian book, The Pilgrim, at the end of number 5, who I guess was somewhat non-possessive, but he'd had from the story, I think he'd had a calamity in his family, and he'd lost his family, so in that case, I guess he was able to live that life from that point on. Yeah. Is that a category, Pilgrim? Is that?
No, well, I mean, there are, in Russia, there's this whole category of pilgrims, straniki, poloniki, but straniki more than anything else. Somebody who's become a stranger to the world. It's a kind of eremitic life.
I met a hitchhiker the first time I went to the Hermitage of the Holy Cross. We've been to I don't even know how many, a lot of countries, 50 countries, hitchhiking to all the different monasteries. He's from Russia. I think that was probably similar to that. He had a Facebook page, or I forgot what the Russian version of Facebook is. They had their own.
The VK.
It might have been one. I don't know, but he shared with us his YouTube channel and stuff like that.
Roshan?
I'm sorry?
His name is Roshan?
His name was Nikita, yeah. Nikita. He was a cool guy. I liked him. He was a really cool guy.
There was this. I don't know if she's been around since I'm not, here very often. The little tiny Ethiopian woman who would come to liturgy, and she always had this huge a pack on her back, including boxes, and I think the boxes are where she would sleep.
You know what? I tried to give her money once. She threw them away on me.
And so,
about this I was talking about earlier.
And she would do this whole little, pious dance in front of the church before she would come in, and as very interesting, and the Metropolitan who was here, he asked, I mentioned her to him, and he said, "How long has she undertaken this?" As he could see that she was really a fool for Christ.
She disappeared.
Yeah. Well, she wanted to go back to Ethiopia. And, I talked to her for a moment. A remarkable lady. And I don't remember her name. But, okay. Well, so we're all going to renounce all possessions and become voters?
Give me a blessing to renounce plumbing, and I'll go back on hitchhiking and hopping trains.
I'll take your car.
No. It's free. It is truly meet to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure and the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compared than the seraphim. Without corruption thou gavest birth to God the Word. True Theotokos, we magnify thee. The blessing of the Lord be upon you through his grace and love for mankind, always now and ever, to ages of ages. Amen.